light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. Today I just wanted to offer a few thoughts and reflections on the freedom to disagree, to choose, and to be different. These are such basic capacities that they probably have some manifestation in virtually every area of life. The contrary seems to be common also in that sometimes it's our commonalities that make it easier for us to work together. If you have engineers, for example, who are all educated in the same methods from the same school, and they're asked to build something, then they all approach it in exactly the same way. And in so doing, there's a certain efficiency to getting the job done more quickly. Yes, to a point. The problem is that life doesn't always present exactly the textbook sorts of challenges, the challenges described by the educational system, by the particular class. Consequently, there needs to be, because there is a diversity of challenging situations, there needs to be a diversity of methods and approaches to how to address the problem. Because what works in one situation won't necessarily work in another situation. In dealing with the complexities of life, the actual life experience of each person can vary so enormously based on relationships, past history, cultural perception, linguistic understanding, familiar relationships. Because there is so much diversity, it makes sense that there would be an enormously wide range of counselors and ministers and teachers, psychologists and psychiatrists, an enormous diversity of the ways that these sorts of professionals work with the public, to work with individuals to help them find effective answers to the challenges of their lives. Specifically because of how much diversity there is, however, it is imperative that even the individual who has no claim to a degree in psychology or whatever, that the individuals still have the ability to choose, to listen to all the various professionals and to consider what they have to say, to consider it carefully, because there is frequently some really important wisdom available there. But to also consider that if they were to ask 100 different psychologists for their opinion, they may very well get 100 different recommendations. The important thing to note is that in getting all these recommendations, the only one who has to live with the consequences of the choice is the individual himself or herself. Because the individual has to live with the consequences of the choice, it only makes sense, to me at least, that the individual should make the choice. That it become the individual's choice based on the information that was available, so that one cannot blame the choice on any of these sources of information. The only thing with which we could fault those sources of information is if they provided clearly incorrect information. In having the ability to disagree, though, it creates a sort of accountability between the two. That because the person stands in the middle and one person says it's black and the other person says it's white, the person in the middle can integrate the two and say, you know, it might just be gray. It might be something that's somewhere between the two. It might be that while one person is advocating a hierarchical governing structure and the other person is advocating an egalitarian structure where everybody's basically equal, that what would actually work best is some integration of the two. That in some areas we may need hierarchy, and in other areas we may need complete equality. As we study the various areas, as we study the context, as we collect information about the choice to be made, hopefully it becomes clear to each person what will be most effective within that situation. The wild card, or the additional variable that has to factor into that, is the values of the individual person. That one may make a choice in a particular direction because of the values they hold. One person may make this choice because they value family. The other person may make this choice because they value individuality. An example of this would be my choice to be open and honest with my family about being gay, with my family of origin, my biological family. When I came out to my parents and told them I have discovered that I am a gay man, and now my life finally makes sense, and this is who I am. It's not a choice I made, but the only choice I could make was a choice of whether or not to be honest with you. On one hand, my parents could have said, we value your honesty, we appreciate that this is a difficult choice, we love you anyway because you're our son. That was not the choice that they made, however. They wanted allegiance to the family at the expense of my individuality. They wanted me to lie about who and what I am in order to fit within their conception of what a family should be. I found myself in a situation that many gay men have faced over time and have answered in various ways. There are gay men who have chosen to subvert and censor and repress their true selves in order to maintain relationships with the family. For my part, I concluded that I needed to be myself, that I could not live a lie, that if their choice was that they could not have an openly gay person in their lives, that was somehow intolerable to them, then I would respect their choice and stay away so that I would no longer be part of their lives. But I could not, as much as I have always wanted a strong sense of family, I understood that a strong sense of family cannot be based on falsehood, cannot be based on pretending to be what somebody wants instead of being who you are, because at some point the illusion will always break down. At some point, pretending that you're not what you are only makes it more obvious that you are. It's as if to say, the harder you pretend to be a professional ballet dancer, the harder you pretend to be a professional ballet dancer and do the things that a professional ballet dancer does, leaps and twirls and finely balanced maneuvers, the more obvious it becomes to everyone in the audience that you simply cannot do the maneuvers the way a professional ballet dancer would. The harder you try to leap high, the more it becomes clear that you can't leap any higher. The harder you try to balance, the more it becomes perfectly clear that you haven't developed that perfect sense of balance. One of the phrases that I've heard somewhat around this is, what you resist persists. The idea being that if you're resisting the truth of yourself, that truth becomes all the more obvious. And it's only when we stop pretending and start being truthful and being honest and being who and what we are, in a sensitive way, in a compassionate way, in a respectful way, but nevertheless in a truthful way. I couldn't not be gay in order to satisfy my parents. I could be gay in a way that wasn't angry and hostile and confrontative, but I couldn't not be gay. I also couldn't be gay in a way that was apologetic and passive and always basically broadcasting by my own actions that there was something wrong with being gay, that I wasn't okay with me being gay. For my part, when I first recognized my orientation, because I have always been very spiritually oriented, I knew that I could not accept myself as a gay man unless I was able to come to an understanding that God had already accepted me as a gay man. that in fact God had made me to be a gay man. And it was only when I came to the conclusion that it was more reasonable to interpret that humanity didn't understand what it means to be gay and all the implications thereof. It was easier to believe that than to believe that for a split second while I was being created, God had somehow lost control of the universe. And oops, there goes another aberration. I didn't mean to create a gay man. They're certainly not in my plan. That's what the church would tell me God would be saying. That's not what I found that God was saying. I found that God was telling me that they don't understand, but you are what you are. And, that I could not embrace God without embracing the truth of myself. What that brings right down to the wire, thus, is that I had to have the freedom to disagree, to choose, and to be different. And without that freedom, I couldn't be what God intended me to be. I couldn't live the life that God had given me to live. I couldn't create the words, the literary works, the paintings, the photographs. I couldn't make the contribution to humanity and to history that God intended me to make unless I was willing to be myself every step of the way. Unless I was willing to embrace the truth of God, the truth from God's perspective, that would lead me to the way to be, the way of being myself. I know for many people, though, this is extremely problematic because they have really strong ties with particular religious communities, with particular biological family groups that their parents may be extremely disapproving of having a gay son or a lesbian daughter, to take it out of the area of orientation. I was told of a family once in which the major issue was not orientation, but because it was a military-oriented family, everybody in the family except for one had all been in the military and believed in military activities and military values and so forth, that when one of the members of the family decided to become a peace-loving pacifist, totally anti-military, it created a wedge between that person and the family that was essentially never healed. That as much as in the book of Ecclesiastes in the Bible, we're told that there is a time for peace and a time for war. In this case, the family was divided, and each part of the family refused to see the opposite. The military part of the family, in this particular example, refused to believe in a time of peace. And the person who was a pacifist refused to believe in the existence of a time of war, and each of them to learn about what those contrasting times would be. As much as I would prefer that there is no time for war, that we can have sustained world peace and so on, this book that is regarded as sacred text asserts that there is a time of war. On one hand, I would like the freedom to disagree with that statement. On the other hand, the fact that the statement is made within a book that is so widely revered, at the very least, says to me that I should think about this very carefully and see if over time I can learn what is it that creates a time of war, an appropriate, inescapable, necessary time of war, and what form would that war take. Even as I'm coming to those conclusions, even as I'm talking with many people and thinking about things and trying to put together a healthy understanding of the duplicity of life this way, that there are times of happiness and sadness and peace and war and youth and age and every other set of opposites, day and night, summer and winter. These contrasts are so extreme and in an immediate sense, virtually mutually exclusive. In becoming a whole person, we have to have the freedom to disagree and the freedom to choose and the freedom to be different in order to achieve the wholeness that is each one of us, that is all of us together. there cannot be a wholeness that does not include both sides. If in any metaphor we can name, whether it's day or night or summer or winter or anything, to stagnate in only part of the cycle, to stagnate the circulatory system of the human body, that a blood clot would form in a particular place and we would simply stay right there and not circulate through the body, well, the body would die. In a similar sort of way, the earth without its seasons would die. There has to be the full cycling, the full circle of events, the full circle of changes. If we had birth but we never had death, the planet would soon be overpopulated to the extent that we would begin to consume each other. It would be totally out of control. If we have no birth and no death, then we lose an appreciation for the complexities and diversity of life. There is something that makes life more precious, specifically because it is not to be taken for granted. It is not eternal. It is not infinite. It has definite parameters, definite boundaries. And because we have to work within those boundaries, every moment becomes precious. On a very literal, mundane level, this is similar to what some cities around the country have done with real estate. That in order to control urban sprawl, they've essentially drawn a line around the city and created a belt of green parks and fields and what have you, all very natural, all very beautiful. The problem being that they now have a finite number of properties inside, and the demand for those properties goes up, and the real estate prices go sky high, and housing costs become unmanageable. Essentially, by creating a circle and closing it off, they work against their own survival. In a sense, it's like the metaphor of the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is situated in this low depression. The problem with that is that there is water flowing into it that never flows out. And consequently, as more and more and more water has flowed in over time, the salt in the water as it comes in has so raised the level of salt in the Dead Sea that nothing can grow there. The essential problem is that you have a location where all the blessings are flowing in and nothing's coming out. It's not so different from a person who is accumulating all the good things and never giving anything away. It comes to the point where the possessions enslave. In choosing, in having the freedom to choose, and having the freedom to disagree, and having the freedom to be different, all the blessings that have been coming in can be consciously manipulated and redirected and sent out. Choices can be made about how resources can be reallocated, rather than simply trying to hold it all in. If we try to be totally homogeneous and totally alike, if there is no freedom for disagreement, no freedom to choose, no freedom to be different, that essentially renders us equivalent to the Dead Sea, where we're salt, which is a food preservative and a flavor enhancer, has now been concentrated in such a way that it becomes toxic. The sameness becomes the poison that keeps us from ever being anything more than we are at this moment. As time marches on and the universe continues to evolve and life continues to change, we consequently find ourselves unable to meet the challenges of future times and future situations, future challenges, future disasters. Which even calling them disasters is a choice and may not completely serve us, because in recognizing that there is pain, that there is loss, that there is destruction, that's all very truthful. In asserting that that is all it is, that there is nothing more, we fail to see what good comes out of it and how we can transform all that raw material into something better. When a forest fire occurs, it burns away forests that may have been there for hundreds of years. It's quite destructive. It's quite destructive to all sorts of life. But once the fire has passed and the rains have returned and the fire's out, and over and over and over again we find that the land has been renewed, that there are seeds and plants and flowers and a cycle of life that begins all over again that cannot begin until or unless the fire occurs. Until or unless we come to this point of recognizing how toxic homogeneity is and how essential diversity is, until we realize how the diversity within ourselves is the diversity that humanity desperately needs, we cannot move beyond where we are. If we rely only upon the answers we already have, we will never know anything more than we already know. There has to be a way, by choice, by exploration, by being different, by allowing what's different, to move beyond what we have, beyond what we know, beyond where we've been, to create new frontiers, new possibilities, new capacities, new ways of being with each other, new ways of working together. All of which requires us to be different, the ability to be different. The additional challenge I've sometimes run into is people who have wanted to help, but have wanted to help me be like them, not taking the time to know how I am already not like them, and that cutting off all of my uniqueness will only metaphorically make me bleed to death. If I do not have the freedom to disagree, even with a teacher, then neither the teacher nor I have the freedom to know anything more than is already known. If I do not have the freedom to disagree with my teacher, I will not be able to learn in the way that I am able to learn, because people have many different ways that they learn, many different ways that, some people are more oriented to sight, some more to hearing, some more to touch. The point is not how we learn so much as that we do. But in order to learn, there has to be something different than where we already are. If there's nothing different than what I already know, nothing different than where I stand, nothing different than what I have, then there's nothing to learn and there's nowhere to grow. There's nothing to add to life experience in any sense of the word. I suppose I've been somewhat rambling as I go through this over and over during the last half hour. I hope I'm able to impress upon you through all this just how very important it is to value the differentness and the uniqueness and the diversity you find within yourself. To consider that it isn't finished, that it may not be polished, it may not be perfect, but it is where you are right now. And it is something special and wonderful by God's design to give to the world. It is when we appreciate that differentness, when we don't think of it as freakish, but rather as uniqueness, when we embrace our ability to choose rather than insisting that others make choices for us, when we embrace freedom in the most positive sense of the word rather than in the more negative sense of shrugging off responsibility, of being insensitive or inconsiderate, of stepping on others, of thinking that as long as I survive, everything's fine, because none of us can survive all on our own. In the choices, in the differentness, in the practice of freedom, there is something better to know of life, something better to know of ourselves. There is something better to know of God, of that which is truly God. If we have no freedom to be different, to make choices, to be unique, then there are parts of the infiniteness of God that we will also never be able to discover. And that cannot have anything other than the worst possible effect on the relationship with highest wisdom and greatest love that I really do believe is available to every single one of us. In any case, thank you very much for watching. I hope that some of the thoughts I've shared in the last half hour are helpful to you. And I encourage you to give yourself the freedom to find your uniqueness, your differentness, and to not presume for one moment that it's something bad, even if for now it may be something that you don't fully understand. Thank you.